Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having a little fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about a very unique animal. It's one that I first knew of because of its shell. Somehow when we were kids, my brother received a shell, and I was often very impressed by it, but I had no idea what it was or where it came from. You may have seen their shells too. They're big. They're kind of just brownish grayish color on the outside, but the inside is super colorful and very bright and shiny and really amazing. Today we're going to talk about abalone. Abalone, what even is that, right? So they are a mollusk. Well, what's a mollusk? A mollusk is a soft-bodied invertebrate, so it doesn't have bones, and it usually has a hard outer shell. So other mollusks that you might be more familiar with would be things like clams and oysters, snails, octopus and squids, although those don't have hard outer shells. Abalone are essentially snails that live in the ocean that get really big. There have been about 80 species identified worldwide. They live in a wide variety of different places, but they all kind of have one thing in common. They all live in areas where there is an abundance of seaweed, and that's because that is what they eat. They eat seaweed, usually kelp or different species of seaweed very similar to kelp. Kelp is actually an algae, it's not a plant. And these giant snails eat this seaweed. Off the coast of America, off the west coast, there are 7 species of abalone that live in California, Oregon, Washington, up to Alaska, down to Mexico through Baja. They are the white, black, pink, green, red, flat, and pinto abalones. They can range in size from the red abalone, which is the biggest, which has about a 12-inch shell. Most of the others are kind of smaller, anywhere from about 4 to about 10 inches. Their shells are kind of oval or ear-shaped. They look kind of ear-shaped like human ears. And on their shells, it's very interesting, they have little holes through them. And out of those holes come these little dangly antenna kind of things. Those holes are very important. They allow water to pass through their gills, enabling them to collect oxygen out of the water. And that is also how they eliminate waste out of their body. But it's also how they release their eggs and sperm out into the water. Their method of reproduction is called broadcast spawning. And what that means is that there's boy abalones and there's girl abalones, and they all kind of live in the ocean near each other. And when it is time for baby abalones to happen, the girl shoots eggs out into the water and the boy shoots sperm out into the water. And hopefully the eggs and sperm meet up and combine to form little baby abalones. So first, when they meet up, it's a fertilized egg that sinks down to the ocean floor. And then it will stay there for a couple of days, and then it will hatch. And the baby abalone are larvae, and they're super, super tiny. And they're kind of like, they're actually part of the plankton grouping of animals. So they're little tiny animals that make up the smallest organisms in the ocean. And those guys go back up to the surface of the water, where they hang out for between 7 and 10 days. After those 10 days, they start to get the itch to settle down. And when they settle down, they look for an area with some rocks where there's some cracks or crevices where they can get in deep and hide, because there's lots of things that may try to eat them, and they know that they need to get someplace safe. So once they do that, they kind of find some algae growing on the rocks, and they will kind of descend, and they have a very strong foot underneath their shell, kind of like a snail, and they'll attach to the rocks and crawl into a little crevice where they'll eat the algae growing on a rock and gradually start to grow bigger. Their shell is attached to them, and from the point where they descend onto the rocks, their shell is there. It is made from calcium carbonate, so it's very hard. They get those minerals from eating the algae, and conditions have to be just right for the right algae to be growing for them to continue to grow, because they eat different kinds of algae throughout different parts of their life cycle. So they typically eat little algae and that grows along the rocks at first, and then once they get a little bigger, they eat algae that's drifting through, and then on occasion they will actually go and hunt for algae and kind of crawl around on the floor of the ocean and along rocks to get to the point where they can get algae that is passing by or is growing nearby that they can kind of snag. But their shell is with them and grows with them throughout their lifetime. Similar to other kinds of snails, right? A snail doesn't leave its shell, it doesn't find a new shell. Snails grow their shells with them throughout their life. So they live a very long time. They can live up to about 40 years for most species, which is a really long time for a snail to live. And they have to be about 3 to 4 inches before they can start spawning. So they start out just itty bitty to where we could even barely see them. They have to get about 3 or 4 inches before they can start to breed. And once they start spawning, initially they're limited in the number of eggs and sperm that they can release, with the small females being able to release about 1,000 eggs, which may sound like a lot, but the big ones can release up to 6 million eggs. And that's really important because when they are big and they're releasing millions of eggs out there, not all the eggs get fertilized, not all the eggs make it. So it's important that they release so many eggs and sperm so that there's a better chance for their species to survive. Now, along the California coast, abalone have been very important for thousands of years to humans. They are an important food source. People eat them. People have also used their shells as a form of currency and something that they've traded. So back to the Native Americans, they would sometimes find places where people had lived for a while, and they could measure that by how many abalone shells were in the area, because they would collect them and trade with other people of different tribes or of neighboring groups who maybe didn't live so close to the coast. They were able to track abalone shell trading through Native American culture all the way east of the Mississippi River. So it got traded to this group of people who traded it to that group of people to this group of people, and on and on and on as the shells made their way across the country. The shells are sometimes called mother of pearl. You may have heard of that. It's sometimes still used in jewelry and in decoration. They can carve it, they can make beautiful things. It's very beautiful, bright colors, very shiny on the inside. And abalone, like their cousins, the oysters, also have the ability to make pearls. A pearl is caused when there's a little grain of sand or some other irritant in between the soft body of the animal and its harder shell. And it will start to secrete mucus around that, and that eventually forms into what we call a pearl. Oysters are the biggest source of pearls in the world, but abalone also can make pearls. And so that was also something when people were collecting abalone and hunting for abalone, sometimes it was to eat them, sometimes it was to get the shell, sometimes it was to get the pearl. Mostly it was to get all three. And they were very, very important for many, many years. During the 1900s, they were actually started to fish for them on a bigger basis, and that became a commercialized industry where boats would hire people to come work on their boats and collect abalone. Now, abalone live pretty close to the shore. Some of them usually live in the tidal zone, so above the water level, or at the water level when it's high tide, and when it's low tide, sometimes the abalone can even be collected off the seashore through tide pools. Some species live a little deeper into the water, possibly as deep as about 180 feet deep. But even at those depths, people could still get to them by diving, and that's important because it's not something you just catch in a net and call it good. When an abalone is threatened or scared, it has those little antennae out those holes so it can kind of know what's going on around it. And when it's in danger, it withdraws into its shell and it clamps its shell down a little harder, and then its big giant snail foot that's already on the rock squeezes against the rock, and it can be very, very tough to get them to release. So much so that people harvesting abalone typically have to have a tool similar to like the back of a hammer or an axe or a shovel kind of thing to help dig the abalone off the rock and pry it up. Especially the big guys, they can really attach to those rocks very strongly. So during the 1900s, it became very, very popular for many people to eat abalone. And for a while, abalone in California was as important as blue crabs in Maryland or lobsters in Maine. And it was something that was really recognized as a local food that if you came to California, you had to try the abalone. And there were huge harvesting parties and festivals and backyard barbecues and all sorts of celebrations around the abalone. Poems were written, songs were written and sung and performed, and especially coastal communities would have huge abalone festivals every year. In addition to the commercialization of fishing them, which really peaked in the 1970s. In one year, in 1973, they harvested 800 metric tons of abalone off the coast of California. That's a huge amount of these snails, right? How many snails would it take to equal that weight? It's mind-blowing. Each one weighs between about a pound to maybe a pound and a half for the big guys. The smaller ones are only going to be in the ounces, so that's thousands and thousands, maybe millions and millions to equal the 800 metric tons of abalone that were harvested in 1973. But after that, the population started to go down, and the fishermen started to notice, and the local people started to notice, and the people throwing abalone festivals started to notice. And they realized that they had maybe taken too many abalone out of the ocean. And so commercial fishing closed in the 1990s along the coast of California. And by 1997, they had closed recreational, or individual people couldn't go fish or catch abalone south of San Francisco. Because they had kind of all started to disappear and they were so few in number. In 2001, the white abalone was added to the endangered species list. It became the first marine invertebrate, or animal without bones, to be listed as endangered. The black abalone was added a few years later, and the pinto and green abalone are listed as species of special concern. So abalone today still exist. They're not extinct. The 7 species along the coast of the western coast of the U.S. still are out there, but they're few and far between. They are all protected, and only the red abalone is still something you can fish for. And actually, the state of California stopped that in 2018, and so that was just 2 years ago. They said no fishing for red abalone this season. There's not enough of them out there. And you could only go north of San Francisco to the state line in California. I don't know for sure what Oregon and Washington and up into Canada were doing. They do have abalone there. I believe you can still fish for some of them there, but not all the species live that far north. But in California, they closed fishing for red abalone in 2018. In 2019, they reevaluated it and they said, you know what? We're going to keep it closed another couple years. So it's for sure closed in California. No fishing of any kind for any abalone in California waters until at least 2021. Then they'll reevaluate for the red abalone north of the San Francisco Bay. So there are many threats facing abalone. The first is overfishing. We ate too many of them. And I say we meaning people. I've actually never eaten one. I didn't even know much about them during the abalone heyday, and the fishing ban was in place long before I ever moved to California. So I haven't had one. I don't know what they taste like. I have no idea. I only know about reading about them and seeing photos. I have seen live abalone. We'll talk about that in a minute. But their overfishing is the biggest threat to them historically. Since the fishing has stopped, though, the numbers haven't rebounded the way that they thought. And they are wondering why, and they started looking into it. And it's taken a bunch of scientists from a bunch of different places many years to kind of figure out what is going on, why have they not rebounded. And there's many issues going on. One of which was a disease that hit hard in California called the wasting disease. And it's actually a disease that's not about abalone. It affected sea stars. But the problem with that is sea stars, one of the things that they really like to eat are sea urchins. Specifically an urchin that lives in California called the purple urchin. And the wasting disease killed a bunch of sea stars. And when that happened, the purple urchin population exploded. There were many, many more of them. They can live up to 100 years, and they can breed really prevalently, so they increased very quickly. The problem with that is that purple urchins also eat the seaweed, and so they started eating a lot more seaweed, and the seaweed started to die off. That was less food for the abalone. They then noticed that there is a disease in some of the abalone populations as well. It's called the withering syndrome, and it causes them to kind of shrink up, and it causes their shell to be a little weaker. And they noticed that that was happening in several spots around the Channel Islands, which are kind of off the coast of California from Santa Barbara down to about LA. And that disease, they're still trying to figure out what causes it and how it exists and all the effects of it. In addition to the disease and the increase in urchins, they've also noticed a couple of years ago here in California, we had a weather phenomenon called El Nino. And that means that there's a big warm pocket of ocean water that comes up the coast from Mexico. During the years that that was present, the giant kelp off the coast of California really started to die off. And when the kelp died off, it caused less food for the abalone, which were already maybe sick from the withering syndrome and already having to compete with many more urchins out in the ocean. And so that made things even worse. So in recent years, when they've done abalone census and looked for abalone out there, many of them that they found are sick, injured, and ill, and have not been doing very well. In addition to that, abalone are a favorite food of a lot of different things that will eat them, in addition to humans. Two of those things that love to eat abalone are a specific kind of octopus that has actually been on the increase in California. It is the two-spotted octopus, I believe. And they have found out that it actually is, octopus are really smart, and they figure out where the abalone live, and then they come in and they hide by where the abalone live, and they'll eat an abalone every day, and then they make abalone shells into their hiding spots so that they can kind of hide around where the abalone are. Another animal that loves to eat abalone are sea otters. And the sea otter population in California has been stable. It's steady. It's not really going up. It's not really going down. but it certainly has increased in the last 20 or 30 years. And during that time, the sea otters have been eating more and more abalone, especially in central California, from about Monterey Bay down to Santa Barbara. So there's a lot of problems going against the abalone. In addition to all that, there are still sometimes people who are hunting them and fishing for them and poaching them, taking them illegally, because apparently they're that delicious that you would do illegal things to get them. And so that is also a continuing problem as well. But there are some people who are doing some really great work to try to help mitigate or lessen some of these threats. Our special shout out today is to this group of organizations, one of which is called the Bodega Marine Laboratory. They have partnered with a bunch of different aquariums, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, the Aquarium of the Pacific, and an organization out of UC Santa Barbara at the university there. They have all been working to breed abalone, specifically the white abalone. That's the one that was first listed as endangered. They've been breeding them in special facilities in protected environments so that they're not getting eaten by predators, so they're not getting this terrible disease, and so that they have a lot of food to eat. They actually are growing kelp that they can then feed to the baby abalone and the bigger abalone. And good news along that line, in November of 2019, they were able to release out into the ocean 3,200 small size abalone that had been bred in captivity. I believe that was their first time releasing them. They hope to be able to release them in the future. On some of their initial testing though, they found out about this octopus that likes to eat them. And they realized that the octopus was looking to see where the divers were going to put the abalone down in and following them. They've since made octopus-proof containers that they can put the abalone in and let the abalone adjust to the ocean currents and temperatures and all those good things. And then they also do a quick census in the area to make sure there's not currently octopus in that area where they're releasing the abalone. So it's an ongoing multi-piece puzzle that they're working with. I'll share some more information about that release and some of the work being done behind the scenes at those aquariums and scientific research places. They are truly doing a lot of really great things. There's also several places that have realized that abalone, one, are delicious, and two, profitable, and they are raising abalone in farms where they are then selling them to restaurants and other places for people to eat so that people aren't taking them out of the ocean. I'll share some information about that too, but there's several in California. There's a big farm in Hawaii that is actually growing a type of abalone from Japan, and they are selling it to people in Hawaii as well as people on the mainland US and people in Asia. So they're able to, I forget their numbers, but they're able to grow in their facility in Hawaii thousands of abalone every year. So they've really done a good job of making it a sustainable practice of farm raising abalone so we don't take them out of the ocean. In my experience, when I worked at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we had abalone on exhibit and you could see them. It was really crazy to watch them move around. They move kind of slow, like a snail, because they are snails. But in addition to that, we had a behind the scenes building. I never was allowed into it because I had no reason to be there. I was in education, and only a few select people who took care of the abalone went there, but they were breeding and raising the white abalone and also doing a lot of research to learn how to best protect them. What was their ideal water temperature? What was the ideal temperature to get the kelp? All of those good things. What is the right water consistency and pH levels, and all of those good things. Oh, that's another threat too. People, we like to mess things up around the world for some reason, and the ocean is definitely one of those things. Around the time that the population started to really crash in California was also at a time when industry and building things and making things was really booming. And during that time, a lot of chemicals were getting dumped into rivers and into the ocean. Right around the time that they stopped fishing for abalone is also when an organization called the Environmental Protection Agency really put new great laws into place, stopping a lot of those practices and protecting the water quality in the ocean so that there weren't harmful chemicals and other poisons and toxins out in the water. Now, our current federal administration is trying to undo those laws. They have been trying to undo those laws for the last 3.5 years. And to some extent, they're succeeding in getting those laws removed. And luckily here in California, our local leaders are fighting to make sure that those laws still exist, at least on a state level. Now, that doesn't help the water conditions in other states, but it does help protect the water right off the coast of California. And that is another way that, as this is an election year, and as you think about who you may support as a candidate, if you're of voting age and registered to vote, which I highly encourage, think about candidates who support clean resources like air and water and limit pollution, as that is a way that we can all help out by using our vote to help argue for a cleaner, healthier environment, because it doesn't just help us, it helps things like abalone. I'll be sharing more information about abalone later today on the Facebook page, so watch for that, including some really fun stuff. Some of my coworkers at the aquarium made a really fun video about abalone. I'll be sharing that as well as some more information, so check that out. As always, feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to any of my content on any of my platforms: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. Until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun, stay safe. Bye.